My name is Tessa Thorne, and I'm 32 years old, living in a cramped but curated studio in Boston's South End, where the brick walls seem to absorb the echoes of everything I've tried to outrun. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 7 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Don't come home this year. Vanessa doesn't want drama. No explanation, no apology, just a door slammed shut on 27 years of trying to belong in a family that treated my existence like a footnote in someone else's biography. I spent that Thanksgiving alone at a small, dimly lit bistro near Beacon Hill, watching the condensation drip down the window as happy families laughed together over overpriced Chardonnay. I fought back tears over a cold turkey dinner that tasted like cardboard and regret. I had no idea that the strangers at the next table would become the family I'd always dreamed of. I had no idea that 5 years later, they'd be introduced at my wedding as the parents of the bride, while my biological parents stood watching uninvited, realizing they'd been replaced in every way that matters. But before I tell you about the redemption, you need to understand the betrayal. Let me take you back to that phone call, the one that finally snapped the tether. I remember exactly where I was standing when my phone rang. It was November 21st, and the Boston air was a biting 34 degrees Fahrenheit, promising a winter that would be as long as it was unforgiving. I was in my tiny studio apartment, surrounded by half-packed bags and the scent of a spiced pumpkin candle from Anthropology I'd lit to force myself into the holiday spirit. I'd already bought my Amtrak ticket home to Greenwich, Connecticut, non-refundable because in my family, you didn't plan for a change of heart. Lydia's name flashed on my screen. I smiled and picked up. "Hey, Mom, I was just about to—" "Tessa." Her voice was a flat line, devoid of any maternal warmth, the kind of tone she usually reserved for telemarketers or people she deemed beneath her. "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. It was a Pavlovian response honed by decades of disappointment. "What's wrong? Is Rob okay?" "Your father's fine." A pause. The kind of silence that feels heavy with the things people are too cowardly to say. "Listen, I've been thinking and don't come home this year." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. "What do you mean, Mom? The train leaves in 72 hours. I already cleared my freelance schedule." "Vanessa doesn't want drama. She's pregnant again, her second in 3 years, and she doesn't need the stress of your energy." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white against the sleek glass of my iPhone. "Drama? What drama? I haven't even talked to Vanessa in months." "Exactly." Lydia's voice hardened into the cold, jagged edge of a New England winter. "And let's keep it that way. You know how you get." "How I get?" My voice cracked, a sharp sound in the silence of my lonely apartment. "Mom, I literally just asked her last year why she didn't invite me to her baby shower. That's not drama. That's a question any sister would ask after driving 3 hours to be there." "See, that's exactly what I mean. You always make everything about you. Vanessa is the one carrying a child, Tessa. She is the one building a legacy for this family. You're just you." I stood there frozen, watching the slushy snow fall outside my window. 27 years old, and my mother was telling me I wasn't welcome at the table because I'd once dared to notice I was being excluded. "Mom, I already bought my ticket. That was $200 I don't really have." "Then get a refund. Or don't. It's your choice how you handle your finances. Vanessa is pregnant. She doesn't need stress. You understand? The line went dead. The dial tone sounded like a heart monitor flatlining. I understood perfectly. I'd always been the acceptable sacrifice. I wish I could say this was the first time. But as I sat on the edge of my IKEA bed, staring at my useless digital ticket, the memories came flooding back like a highlight reel of a life lived in the shadows of a golden child. My 16th birthday party in suburban Connecticut. I'd been planning it for months, a small gathering with my 3 closest friends. Mom promised we'd have red velvet cake and go to the luxury bowling alley in Stamford. But the morning of, Vanessa called, crying because she'd failed her calculus final and needed emotional support. My party was canceled. Not rescheduled, not moved, just erased. We spent the day consoling my sister instead. "Don't be dramatic, Tessa," Lydia had said as she handed Vanessa a pint of Ben & Jerry's. "Your sister needs us more right now. You can celebrate next weekend." We never did. Next weekend was about Vanessa's cheerleading competition. Then there was my college graduation. I'd worked so hard for that moment. 4 years of juggling a design internship, waitressing at a Greasy Spoon in Allston, and scraping by on ramen and sheer spite. I was the first person in my family to graduate with honors. When I walked across that stage, the sun beating down on the stadium at 88 degrees Fahrenheit, I looked for my parents in the crowd. I wanted to see Rob's proud nod or Lydia's rare smile. Their seats were empty. They showed up 2 hours late. Vanessa had a routine prenatal checkup that couldn't be rescheduled. "You understand, sweetheart," Lydia had whispered later, not even looking me in the eye. "Your sister's baby is more important than a ceremony. A degree is just a piece of paper, but family is forever." More important than me. That's what she meant. That's what she always meant. I learned early that complaining only made things worse. "Don't be so sensitive. Stop making everything about yourself. Why can't you just be happy for your sister?" It was the anthem of my childhood, a gaslighting symphony conducted by a woman who valued peace over justice. So, I stopped complaining. I became smaller, quieter. I became a ghost in my own home, a master of invisibility. I thought if I was agreeable enough, easy enough, if I didn't take up any space or ask for any oxygen, maybe then I'd finally earn their love. I was 27 years old, sitting in a cold apartment in a city that didn't know my name, with a worthless ticket to a home that didn't want me. And I finally realized the truth. The realization hit me with the force of a gale off the Atlantic. There was no amount of small that would ever be small enough. I could vanish entirely, and they would only complain about the shadow I left behind. I grabbed my phone again, my fingers trembling as I scrolled to Dad. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some small part of me still believed he'd stand up for me. Maybe I thought that after 3 decades, the man who used to read me bedtime stories would finally find his spine. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey, kiddo." His voice was cautious, heavy with the weary resignation of a man who had long ago traded his integrity for a quiet house. He already knew. "Dad, did Mom tell you?" I could hear the TV in the background, probably a Patriots game, the commentators shouting about a play that didn't matter. She mentioned it. And you're okay with this? You don't think maybe I should be allowed at Thanksgiving with my own family? Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear him rubbing his forehead, trying to find a way to stay neutral in a war where neutrality was a betrayal. You know how your mother is, Tessa. She's just trying to manage the situation. She's managing the situation by excluding me, Dad. It's not drama to exist. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Tell me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're all choosing Vanessa over me again. It looks like I'm the only one who has to pay the price for Vanessa's moods. Silence. I could hear him breathing. I could almost see him sitting in his leather recliner, the one with the worn armrests, looking at the floor because he couldn't bear to look at the truth. Dad, do you want me there? 5 seconds passed. 10. The silence was an indictment. I think he cleared his throat. I think it's better if you listen to your mother this year. Let's just let things cool down, okay? We'll do something for Christmas. Something inside me went quiet. Not sad, not angry, just empty. A vast, hollow space where my hope used to live. Okay, Dad. Tessa, don't be like, I said, okay. I hung up. He didn't call back. I sat in my apartment as the sun went down over the Boston skyline, watching the shadows stretch across my floor like long, dark fingers. Rob Thorne had a chance to choose me, to say one word in my defense against the woman who had spent years chipping away at my soul, and he chose silence instead. He was always in the middle, but I realized he just always chose to stand on their side because it was the path of least resistance. But as the darkness settled in, something else settled too. A quiet, terrifying decision. If I wasn't welcome at their table, I'd stop begging for the crumbs. If they wanted me gone, I would become the ghost they always treated me as. I would make my own Thanksgiving, even if I had to build it from the wreckage of my own heart. Thanksgiving Day arrived in Boston like a gray shroud, the sky the color of dirty slush, and the wind whipping off the Charles River at a relentless 20 miles per hour. I woke up in my studio apartment to the muffled, mocking sounds of someone else's joy. The radiators hissed and clanked, a rhythmic heartbeat in the silence, while overhead, the heavy footsteps of my neighbors signaled the arrival of their extended family. I could hear children laughing, high, bright sounds that cut through the floorboards like a knife, and the muffled warmth of voices I couldn't make out, but whose cadence spoke of belonging. The air in the hallway was thick with the scent of sage, rosemary, and roasting turkey, a sensory assault that drifted through the vents and mocked my empty kitchen. I made instant coffee in a chipped mug I'd had since college and sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the empty street below. A lone Uber sped by, likely carrying someone to a house filled with people who actually wanted them there. My phone stayed silent all morning. No calls, no texts, not even a Happy Thanksgiving gift from anyone in my family. The silence was a physical weight, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to swallow. Around noon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. My thumb hovered over the colorful icon for a second, a warning bell going off in my head, but I ignored it. I needed to see. I needed to know how the peace was being kept without me. Vanessa had posted a photo 10 minutes earlier, filtered to a warm golden hue that made everything look like a Hallmark movie. The whole family was gathered around the heavy oak dining table in the Greenwich house, the table where I used to sit every Sunday. Lydia, Rob, Vanessa, her husband Brad, and their 2-year-old son Leo, who was wearing a tiny, ridiculous turkey sweater that I probably would have found cute if my heart weren't breaking. Everyone was smiling. Rob looked relaxed, his glass of Cabernet raised toward the camera, a man who had finally escaped the drama of his youngest daughter's feelings. The caption read, "So grateful for my tribe. These are the people who matter most. Finally, a peaceful holiday." I zoomed in on the photo, my heart racing as I counted the place settings with a clinical, agonizing precision. 4 adults, 1 toddler, 5 chairs. The table was perfectly balanced, a symmetrical masterpiece of exclusion. There wasn't even an empty seat where I should have been. There was no, "we missed you," or "wish you were here." They hadn't just excluded me for one holiday. They'd erased me. They had scrubbed the Thorne family history clean of my existence, creating a narrative where I was never a part of the tribe to begin with. I closed the app, the screen of my phone turning black, reflecting my own hollow expression back at me. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. I thought about ordering delivery, maybe some subpar Chinese food from the only place open, and spending the rest of the day in bed with the curtains drawn. That's what I deserved, right? A sad meal eaten in the dark, a bitter daughter mourning a life that was never hers. That's the script they wrote for me. Tessa, the dramatic one. Tessa, the problem child who ruins everything. But something in me refused to follow the script. A small, embers-hot spark of defiance flared up in the hollow of my chest. No, I wasn't going to sit here and let them win. I wasn't going to let their rejection turn me into exactly what they accused me of being, a sad, bitter, dramatic mess. If I was going to be in exile, I would be a well-fed one. I grabbed my coat, a heavy wool trench I'd bought on sale at Nordstrom, and wrapped a cashmere scarf around my neck. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, I was going to do it somewhere with actual food, with light, with life. I needed to be around people, even if I wasn't with them. I just had to find a restaurant that hadn't surrendered to the holiday. Harborview Grill was a relic of old money Boston, an institution tucked away near the waterfront. It was all dark mahogany wood, polished brass fixtures, and the kind of hushed, expensive atmosphere that still demanded cloth napkins and real candles on every table. It was the kind of place Lydia would have loved, which was exactly why I chose it. A small, private act of reclaiming my own taste. When I pushed through the heavy oak doors, the warmth hit me like a wave. The air was a rich tapestry of roasted bird, buttery brioche, and the crisp, clean scent of expensive gin. There was the soft clink of silver against china, and everywhere I looked, there were families. Couples with silver-haired grandparents, parents wrangling toddlers, groups of friends who laughed with the easy, unforced rhythm of people who knew each other's secrets. The restaurant hummed with the sound of people who belonged somewhere. The hostess, a woman in her 50s with a sharp bob and a string of pearls, looked at me with barely concealed pity. In a room full of boisterous tables of 10, a single woman on Thanksgiving was a tragedy she didn't have time to process. "Just one tonight?" she asked, her voice dipping into that soft, patronizing register people use for the grieving. Just one, I said, keeping my chin up, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. She led me to a tiny two-top in the far corner, squeezed between the heavy swinging door of the kitchen and a massive, sprawling family that took up 3 tables pushed together. It was the unwanted table, the one they gave to people who didn't fit the floor plan. I sat down, the back of my chair almost touching the chair of a man at the big table. I opened the menu, staring at the elegant script without seeing the words, trying to look like this was a deliberate, sophisticated choice. The family next to me was celebrating hard. An older couple sat at the head, the woman's silver hair shimmering under the chandelier. There was a middle-aged man with his wife and 2 kids, a boy and a girl who were currently debating the merits of mashed potatoes versus yams, and a younger man, maybe 30, who was leaning back in his chair, making the whole table erupt in laughter. 3 generations, bound together by more than just DNA. You could see it in the way they leaned toward each other, the way they passed dishes without needing to be asked. I watched them out of the corner of my eye, a ghost haunting a feast, and felt something crack open in my chest. This is what family is supposed to look like. Not a negotiation of drama, not a competition for oxygen, but a shared space where everyone had a seat and no one was a sacrifice. The server arrived with a bread basket, warm, sea-salted rolls that smelled like heaven, and a tight, professional smile. "The Thanksgiving special, please," I said. I was going to get through this dinner. I was going to be fine. I would go home, watch a movie, and wake up tomorrow as a woman who didn't need a tribe. But as the first course arrived, I realized I wasn't fine. The weight of the Instagram photo, the 5 chairs, and the people who matter most was crushing the air out of my lungs. My turkey arrived, golden skin, tart cranberry sauce, a perfect scoop of garlic whipped potatoes. It looked like a magazine photo, a masterpiece of culinary comfort. I couldn't taste any of it. Every bite felt like ash. I sat there pushing food around my plate, the silver fork feeling heavy and clumsy in my hand. I tried not to look at the family beside me, tried not to hear their inside jokes or the way the grandfather called the little girl sweetheart. I tried not to think about the Thorne table in Connecticut, where Vanessa was likely complaining about the salt content of the stuffing, while Lydia nodded in sympathetic agreement and Rob stared at the wall. I had spent 27 years trying to earn a place at their table, bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes until I was practically invisible. I had swallowed my hurt like bitter medicine, apologized for having feelings that inconvenienced them, and stayed quiet when I should have screamed. And what had it gotten me? A corner table by a kitchen door, a meal eaten in a room full of strangers, and a digital legacy where I didn't exist. If I kept going like this, if I kept trying to be small enough to be loved by people who only loved themselves, what would I have left? At some point, there would be nothing left of Tessa Thorne to shrink. The realization didn't come as a shock. It came as a quiet, devastating funeral for the girl I used to be. The tears came before I could stop them. They didn't fall, they spilled, hot and silent, blurring the vision of my perfect, lonely dinner. I turned my face toward the window, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass, hoping the shadows would hide my shame. I grabbed my linen napkin and pressed it to my eyes, trying to disappear, trying to be the ghost they wanted me to be. Honey? I froze. The voice was warm, rich with a genuine concern that I hadn't heard in years. I didn't look up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to be erased, just like the photo. Are you okay? I froze, my breath catching in a throat that felt like it was lined with sandpaper. A woman's voice, warm and textured like aged bourbon, drifted over the back of my chair. Honey? I looked up, my eyes stinging, my vision a blurred mosaic of candlelight and white linen. The older woman from the family next to me was standing beside my table. She had a mane of elegant silver hair, swept back from a face that wore its wrinkles like medals of honor. Lines carved by decades of laughter, concern, and actually listening to people. She was looking at me like I mattered, with an intensity that made me feel seen for the first time in 30 years. I'm fine, I said automatically, the lie tasting like copper in my mouth. Just allergies. Boston pollen, you know? The woman raised one eyebrow, a gesture that managed to be both sharp and incredibly kind. Allergies don't usually make people cry into their napkin on Thanksgiving, and they certainly don't make them look like the world just ended between the turkey and the cranberry sauce. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, a jagged noise that broke the polished atmosphere of the harbor view. That obvious? Only to someone who's paying attention, and I've made a career out of paying attention. She had a gentle voice, but there was steel underneath, the unmistakable aura of a woman who had seen the worst of humanity and still chose to believe in the best of it. I'm Eleanor Montgomery. Tessa. Well, Tessa. She glanced back at her boisterous family, then back at my lonely, half-eaten dinner. No one should eat alone on this day. It's a violation of the holiday spirit, and frankly, it's bad for the digestion. Why don't you come join us? I shook my head immediately, my social anxiety flaring up like a rash. Oh, no, I couldn't. I'm fine here. I don't want to intrude on your family time. You're not intruding, she said, her smile widening into something undeniable. I'm inviting. There's a legal and moral difference between the two. I really appreciate it, but my husband tells terrible jokes, she continued as if I hadn't spoken, her hand resting lightly on the back of my chair, a grounding presence. And my son Marcus keeps trying to start political debates that no one asked for. You might as well come suffer with us at the big table. It's much harder to cry when someone is arguing about the Celtics' defensive line. The older man, Richard, waved at me from the head of the long table, his face ruddy with wine and good humor. She won't take no for an answer, Tessa. Trust me, 43 years of marriage and I've never won an argument. Just surrender now, it's easier. The younger son, Marcus, apparently, grinned at me, his eyes bright and curious. He's not wrong. My mother has a 100% success rate in forced hospitality. I looked at my cold turkey, the congealing gravy a metaphor for my life in Connecticut. I looked at my empty table, my napkin still damp with the evidence of my erasure. Then I looked at Eleanor Montgomery and her warm eyes and her family that somehow had room for a ghost. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling like a leap of faith. If you're sure. I'm sure, Eleanor said, her hand moving to my shoulder, a firm maternal squeeze that sent a jolt of electricity through my numb heart. Come on. We just opened another bottle of silver oak, and there's way too much pecan pie for one family to handle. I stood up on shaky legs and followed her to the table, feeling like a castaway being pulled onto a sturdy, warm ship, not knowing that this single moment, this small act of radical American kindness from a woman I'd never met, was about to change the entire trajectory of my life. They made room for me like I'd always been there, shifting chairs and sliding place settings with a practiced ease. Someone pulled up a chair. Someone else handed me a fresh glass. Before I could even sit down, I had a glass of wine in my hand and a warm roll on my plate. I'm Richard, the older man said, shaking my hand firmly, his grip solid and reassuring. This is my wife, Eleanor, our son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, their kids, Emma and Lucas, and our youngest, Marcus. Hi, I gave an awkward little wave to the table, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I'm Tessa. Thank you so much for... What do you do, Tessa? Daniel asked, passing me the bowl of garlic mashed potatoes as if we'd known each other since grade school. I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly. I work with a lot of startups in the seaport. That's wonderful, Sarah said. I can barely draw a stick figure without it looking like a cry for help. Mom, stick figures are easy, Emma said. She looked about 8 with a sprinkle of freckles across her nose. Even I can do that. You're just dramatic. Everyone laughed. Not at anyone, but with each other. A rich communal sound that felt like a warm blanket. It was such a foreign sound to me. In the Thorne house, laughter was always a weapon, or a reward for good behavior. Marcus caught my eye from across the table. He was around my age, maybe a little older, with dark hair and an easy, genuine smile that didn't feel like a performance. Fair warning, my dad's about to tell a joke. It's his Thanksgiving special, and it's legally classified as a war crime. I am not, Richard protested, though his eyes were twinkling. He is, Eleanor said, leaning back in her chair. Richard grinned. Okay, fine. Tessa, since you're the guest of honor, you have to hear it. What did the turkey say to the computer? Dad, no, Daniel groaned, burying his face in his hands. Google, Google, Google! The kids burst into giggles. Sarah rolled her eyes. Marcus shook his head. And I actually laughed. A real deep-bellied laugh that felt like it was breaking up the ice that had frozen over my soul all morning. Richard raised his wine glass, the candlelight catching the deep ruby of the wine. A toast to unexpected guests who make our table complete. To Tessa, for being brave enough to sit with a bunch of loud-mouthed Montgomerys. Everyone raised their glasses, including me. I looked around at these people, strangers, all of them, until 15 minutes ago, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Warmth, acceptance, a sense of being wanted rather than tolerated. I didn't know families could feel like this. I didn't know you could be home in a restaurant corner. After the main course, while the kids ran off to explore the restaurant's brass-lined lobby and the men argued about the Patriots' chances in the playoffs, Eleanor moved to the chair next to mine. How are you doing? She asked quietly, her voice dropping into a register that invited honesty. Really? I looked down at my plate, tracing the pattern on the china. Better. This is really nice. Thank you. I didn't realize how much I needed a Google joke today. You're welcome, she said, taking a sip of her wine. But that's not what I asked. Something about her directness, that quintessential New England lack of fluff, made me want to be honest. I'm okay. I'm just having a hard Thanksgiving. The kind of day where the silence is louder than the parade. Do you want to tell me why you're really here alone? And don't say allergies again. My bullshit detector is finely tuned. I hesitated. The truth felt too pathetic to say out loud to a stranger. My own mother told me not to come home because I'm drama. My sister thinks I'm a stress inducer. My father chose a football game and a quiet life over his daughter. But Eleanor waited, patient, her gaze steady and judgmental free. My mom called me 3 days ago, I finally said, the words coming out in a rush. Told me not to come home to Greenwich. My sister is pregnant and she didn't want drama. Drama? That's what they call it when I ask questions they don't want to answer. Like why I wasn't invited to the baby shower, or why my birthday was canceled for a failed math test. Eleanor nodded slowly, her expression shifting into something professional yet deeply empathetic. I see. The classic scapegoat dynamic. It's fine, I added quickly, the old habit of minimizing my pain kicking in. I mean, it's not fine, but I should be used to it by now. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through my excuses. Can I tell you something I learned in 30 years as a family lawyer? I blinked. You're a lawyer? Retired family law, Montgomery and Associates, she smiled. I've seen every kind of family dysfunction you can imagine, from the billionaires on Beacon Hill to the working families in Southie. And I've learned one universal truth. The people who accuse you of causing drama are almost always the ones creating the chaos. They just need a repository for their own guilt. And you were the easiest target. The words hit me like a physical force, knocking the wind out of my lungs. You're not the problem, Tessa. Eleanor put her hand over mine, her skin warm and papery. You never were. You were just the only one brave enough to notice the house was on fire. And they hated you for pointing at the flames. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Those were the words I'd needed to hear my entire life. The validation that my drama was actually just truth. The evening wound down slowly, the way good dinners do when no one wants the magic to end. Pie was served, pumpkin and pecan with mounds of fresh whipped cream. Coffee was poured, the steam rising in the cool air of the restaurant. The kids eventually fell asleep on Sarah's lap, exhausted from the excitement. When the check came, I reached for my wallet, but Richard waved me off with a stern, playful look. Please, he said. Our treat. It's a Montgomery tradition. I can't let you. You can, and you will. Consider it a new friend tax. We always buy dinner for people who can survive a night with us. As we gathered our coats, the wind howling outside the Harborview doors, Eleanor pressed something into my hand. A small card, cream-colored with elegant black text. I looked down. Eleanor Montgomery, J.D., Family Law, Retired. Below that, a phone number and an address in Brookline. If you ever need to talk, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and expensive perfume. Call me. I mean it. No one gets left behind on my watch. Richard appeared beside us, shrugging on his heavy overcoat. Sunday dinners every week at our place in Brookline, Tessa. The food is better and the jokes are unfortunately the same. You're welcome anytime. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill again. That's so kind, but I couldn't. She could, and she should, Marcus said, joining the group, his hands in his pockets, a soft look in his eyes. Mom never says things she doesn't mean. Trust me, it's a family trait. See you Sunday? Eleanor squeezed my hand one last time. Family isn't always blood, Tessa. It's the people who show up when the rest of the world shuts the door. I stood there in the restaurant lobby, holding a business card that felt like a lifeline, receiving an open invitation from a family I had no claim to. Outside, the snow was falling harder, turning Boston into a silent, white wonderland. I watched the Montgomerys walk toward their car, Richard helping Eleanor with her scarf, Daniel carrying a sleepy child, Marcus looking back one last time with a nod. I wasn't the ghost anymore. I was someone who had just been found. I didn't go to Sunday dinner the next week, or the week after that. It felt too strange, too forward, like I was trying to hijack someone else's holiday miracle to replace the wreckage of my own life. It felt too much like I was imposing on a family that already seemed perfect in its own orbit. But Eleanor Montgomery called, not with the sharp, demanding tone of my mother, but with a voice that sounded like a warm cup of Earl Grey on a rainy afternoon. She called just to check in, she said, just to see how I was doing with my freelance deadlines in the biting Boston winter. By early December, as the first major nor'easter of the season began to blanket the city in 10 inches of heavy white powder, I kui-kung accepted the invitation. That first Sunday, I stood on the Montgomery's porch in Brookline for 5 full minutes as the temperature dropped to a crisp 28 degrees Fahrenheit, my breath blooming in white clouds, before I worked up the courage to knock. The house was exactly what I'd imagined, a beautiful 3-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and amber lights glowing in every window, like a lighthouse for lost souls. It looked like the kind of place where good things happened, where voices were never raised in anger, and where the floorboards creaked with history rather than tension. Eleanor opened the door before I could even raise my hand to the brass knocker. There you are! She pulled me into a hug that smelled of expensive vanilla and wood smoke, like it was the most natural thing in the world. We saved you a seat. Richard is already losing his mind over the roast. That was the first of many Sundays. Over the next 6 months, I became a regular at the Montgomery dinner table. Richard taught me to play chess in the library, a room filled with the smell of old leather and law books. And even though I lost every single game to his calculated maneuvers, he made me feel like a grandmaster just for showing up. Eleanor showed me her secret pie crust recipe, the one she swore she'd never written down because tradition is carried in the fingertips, not on paper. Daniel's kids started calling me Aunt Tessa without anyone telling them to, a title that felt like a heavy, golden crown I wasn't sure I was allowed to wear. And Marcus and I became friends. Real friends. The kind who texted sarcastic observations about architectural trends at 2 a.m. and argued about Wes Anderson movies and sat next to each other at dinner without anyone having to arrange it. There was an ease between us, a lack of performance that I had never experienced with another human being. I didn't hear from my biological family once. Not a call, not a text, not even a Christmas card sent out of a sense of obligation. For the first time in my life, I stopped noticing, because for the first time, I wasn't performing for love. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into a mold that Vanessa and Lydia had designed for me. I wasn't the dramatic daughter or the problem child. I was just Tessa. And in the Montgomery house, being Tessa was more than enough. It felt like finally coming home to a place I didn't even know existed. One spring afternoon, about 8 months after that first Thanksgiving, Eleanor and I were sitting on her back porch. The garden was just starting to bloom, tulips pushing up through the damp Massachusetts soil, and the scent of damp earth and lilac heavy in the air. Richard was inside watching a Red Sox game with Marcus. We could hear them shouting at the TV, their cheers echoing through the screen door. "Have you heard from your parents?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but penetrating. I watched a robin land on the white picket fence. "No, and I haven't reached out either." She nodded, no judgment in her eyes, just the calm observation of a woman who had seen 1,000 broken hearts and knew how to mend them. "Do you want to?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "Sometimes," I admitted, the confession feeling heavy in the afternoon sun. In the middle of the night, mostly. I'll think about calling my mom and trying to explain, but then I remember there's nothing to explain. She knows what she did. She just doesn't think it was wrong because Vanessa's comfort is the only currency she values. "That's a hard thing to accept," Eleanor said, her hand reaching out to squeeze mine. "It is." I pulled my cardigan tighter against a sudden, cool breeze. I keep waiting to feel guilty. Everyone says you should forgive your family no matter what. Blood is thicker than water and all that New England stoicism. "You know, I've never believed that," Eleanor said, taking a slow sip of her chamomile tea. "In my career as a family lawyer, I helped a lot of people find legal recognition for the families they've built, not just the ones they were born into." I turned to look at her, the light catching the silver in her hair. "What do you mean?" She smiled, soft and knowing, a look that suggested she had already mapped out a future I hadn't even dared to dream of. "Just that the law recognizes what the heart already knows. That family can be created, not just inherited. There are ways to make those bonds official, Tessa. Ways to ensure that the people who show up for you are the only ones who have a say in your life." I didn't fully understand what she was hinting at. Not yet. "Something to think about," Eleanor said, patting my hand with a finality that signaled the conversation was over. "Whenever you're ready." It happened so naturally that I almost didn't notice it happening. 2 years after that first Thanksgiving, Marcus and I weren't just friends anymore. We were a quiet, steady force, a partnership built on Sunday dinners and shared silences. He asked me to dinner at Harbor View Grill, the same restaurant where we'd met. "This feels circular," I said, sliding into the booth, the same booth where I'd once sat alone, a ghost in a wool coat. "That's the point," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. Marcus was nervous. I could tell by the way he kept adjusting his silk tie and the way he'd barely touched his Manhattan. "Tessa, I wanted to bring you back to where it all started." "Where what started?" He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm and certain. "Tessa, I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months. I've watched you heal. I've watched you build a life out of nothing but your own strength." He took a breath. The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of conversation fading into the background. "I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you every single day. I want to be the person who never lets you eat alone." "Marcus, I know your family hurt you, Tessa. I know you're scared of people who are supposed to love you letting you down. But I'm not a thorn, and I'm not a ghost." He pulled out a small velvet box and clicked it open to reveal a pear-cut diamond that shimmered like a star. "Tessa Thorne, will you marry me?" I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. The girl who had been erased from an Instagram photo was now being asked to be the center of someone's entire world. "Yes," I whispered, the word feeling like the first real thing I'd ever said. "Yes." He slipped the ring on my finger, the weight of it a solid, physical promise. The restaurant erupted in applause. I'd been so focused on Marcus, I hadn't even noticed the other diners watching. And then I saw them in the corner booth. Richard and Eleanor, a bottle of Veuve Clicquot already poured, beaming at us like they'd been in on the secret from the beginning. "Mom couldn't resist," Marcus laughed, pulling me into a kiss that tasted like the future. I was going to officially become a Montgomery. The wedding planning began immediately. The venue, the catering, the endless flower consultations. But one question kept me up at night, a cold, nagging fear that wouldn't let go. The wedding invitations would need a line for "Parents of the Bride," and I had no idea what to write there. Robert and Linda Thorne. They hadn't spoken to me in over 2 years. They hadn't called on my 30th birthday. They hadn't acknowledged my existence in any way. I couldn't put their names on my wedding invitation. They hadn't earned that honor. They were strangers sharing my DNA, nothing more. I was pacing in the Montgomerys' living room one evening when Eleanor found me. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" I told her about the invitation, about the impossible line I couldn't figure out how to fill without feeling like I was lying to the world. Eleanor sat down and patted the velvet cushion beside her. "There's something I mentioned to you once about legal recognition for chosen family. Do you remember?" I nodded slowly. "You said the law recognizes family that's created." "Adult adoption," Eleanor said gently, her eyes reflecting a fierce, protective love. "It's a legal process in the state of Massachusetts where a consenting adult is formally adopted by another family. It creates a legal parent-child relationship, a new birth certificate, new legal next of kin status, a total severance of the past. It would make you, in every sense of the word, our daughter." My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. That's a real thing?" "Very real. I've helped many people through the process. It's not just paperwork, Tessa. It's a declaration." I looked at this woman who'd pulled me into her family on the loneliest night of my life, who'd taught me that my voice mattered. "Eleanor," my voice cracked, the tears finally coming. "Would you and Richard consider—" She pulled me into her arms before I could even finish the sentence. "We've considered you our daughter since that first slice of turkey, Tessa," she whispered against my hair. "We were just waiting for you to be ready to come home." The adoption process took several months. The paperwork, the court appearances at the Norfolk County Probate and Family Court, the legal filings. But with Eleanor guiding me through every step, with Marcus holding my hand in the hallways, it felt less like bureaucracy and more like a sacred ceremony. When the judge signed the final order, the gavel hitting the wood with a sound like a closing door, I legally became Tessa Montgomery. I had a new birth certificate, new legal parents, a new family on paper and in my heart. The Thorne legacy was officially dead. The wedding was set for the following June. We sent out invitations with the line I'd agonized over, now proudly printed in elegant gold script. Parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Montgomery. I should have known the Thornes would eventually find out. In a town like Greenwich, secrets have a way of leaking through the stone walls of the country clubs. 3 months before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, the first message from her in nearly 3 years. Did you know Tessa is getting married? And she changed her name? What is wrong with her? I stared at the screen for a long second. Then I blocked the number with a steady hand. A week later, my biological mother called 5 times in one day. I let every call go to voicemail. Finally, a text. Why didn't you tell us? We're your family. Call me back immediately. This is humiliating for us. I read it twice, noting how she still managed to make my marriage about her humiliation. Then I deleted it. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending I didn't exist. And now, suddenly, they remembered they had another daughter, only because it affected their social standing. I wasn't angry. I had moved past anger into a cold, clear space of indifference. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them a seat at my table. The wedding day dawned golden and perfect, a masterclass in Northern California light. June in Napa Valley meant the air was a crisp 72 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning, climbing toward a sun-drenched 85 degrees by mid-afternoon. We'd chosen a private vineyard with rolling hills that looked like a painting of endless grapevines, the heavy scent of ripening Cabernet and wild lavender perfuming the breeze. In the bridal suite, a stone cottage that felt like it had been transported from the French countryside, I stood before a full-length mirror while Eleanor Montgomery adjusted my veil. The lace was antique, a family heirloom she'd insisted I wear. "You look beautiful," she said softly, her voice thick with a maternal pride I had spent 27 years starving for. "Absolutely beautiful, Tessa." I looked at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was calmer, stronger than the girl who'd sat alone at the Harborview Grill 5 years ago. That girl hadn't believed she deserved to be loved without a price tag. This woman, the new Tessa Montgomery, knew better. On the mahogany vanity beside me sat a copy of the wedding program. I picked it up, reading the line I'd once thought was an impossible dream. Parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Montgomery. Underneath, in smaller, elegant text, the family who chose her. Eleanor noticed me looking, her hand coming to rest on my shoulder, steady and warm. "Are you nervous about marrying Marcus?" "No," I said, setting down the program. "I'm nervous about what might happen. Just a little." I'd hired private security for the wedding, discreet men in dark suits who blended into the vineyard scenery. A quiet precaution. After Lydia's vitriolic visit to my apartment, I knew there was a chance she'd try to reclaim the narrative. Eleanor put her hands on my shoulders, forcing me to meet her gaze. "Whatever happens today, You have a family who chose you. We will always choose you, Tessa. In every room, at every table, you are our first thought, not an afterthought. I hugged her tight, the scent of her lavender perfume a familiar anchor. I love you, Mom. It was the first time I'd called her that without a tremor in my voice. The word came out naturally, like it had always been waiting for the right person. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I love you too, sweetheart. My daughter. Through the window, I could see guests arriving, a sea of linen suits and summer dresses. Marcus was already at the altar, a rustic arch of white roses and eucalyptus, looking nervous and handsome in his gray suit. It was time. The ceremony was everything a Thorne production never could be. Marcus waiting at the end of the aisle, Richard walking me toward him, his arm steady and proud, a man who wasn't just keeping the peace, but actively celebrating a miracle. The vows we'd written ourselves were words that made half the guests cry, and the other half pretend they weren't crying. When Marcus slipped the gold band on my finger, and the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, I felt something click into place, a legal and spiritual finality that the past could no longer touch. The reception was in full swing inside a massive, renovated stone barn where the rafters were draped in fairy lights and the tables groaned under the weight of farm-to-table delicacies. The music was a mix of classic jazz and modern soul, and the atmosphere was electric with genuine joy. I was laughing at a story Marcus was telling when a security guard found me. Mrs. Montgomery? He appeared at my elbow, discreet and professional. There are 2 people at the entrance. They claim to be your parents. They don't have invitations, but they're making a scene about blood rights. I'd expected this. A part of me had been waiting for the other shoe to drop all day. Marcus appeared beside me, his expression instantly hardening. I'll handle it, Tessa. I'll have them removed before they even see the cake. No. I took his hand, feeling the solid weight of my new ring. This is my moment. I'll handle it. I don't want to hide anymore. I considered my options. I could have them removed. I could ignore them. But something in me said, let them see. Let them witness the life I built from the ashes they left behind. Let them in, I told the guard. But don't seat them with the family. Put them in the back, near the service entrance. Are you sure? Marcus asked, his concern a sharp contrast to the indifference I'd grown up with. I'm sure. A few minutes later, I saw them, Lydia and Rob Thorne, standing uncertainly at the edge of the reception. Lydia was wearing a dress that was far too formal for a vineyard wedding, looking around with a sharp, judgmental eye that was already searching for flaws. Rob stood behind her, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. They had no idea what was coming. The MC was about to make his announcement. The timing was, as the Montgomerys would say, legally perfect. The MC stepped up to the microphone. The music softened to a low hum. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. The room quieted. Guests turned toward the front. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Before we continue the celebration, I'd like to introduce some very special people, the people who made this day possible. I watched my biological parents from across the room. Lydia straightened her posture, a practiced smile beginning to form, her chin lifting as she prepared to accept the recognition she believed was rightfully hers. Please join me in welcoming the parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Montgomery. The room erupted in applause. Richard and Eleanor stood from the head table, beaming, waving to the guests. People cheered, someone whistled, the photographer snapped photos, and across the room, Lydia Thorne's face went white, a shade of pale that I can only describe as total psychological collapse. I watched it happen in slow motion, the confusion, the disbelief, and finally, the realization of what those words meant. Richard and Eleanor Montgomery, the family who chose Tessa and whom Tessa chose in return. Lydia grabbed Rob's arm so hard I could see her knuckles turn white. What did he just say? Rob looked stunned, speechless. Around them, guests clapped and smiled, completely unaware that the older couple in the back had any connection to the bride at all. To everyone else at this wedding, the Montgomerys were the only parents I had. Lydia pushed through the crowd before I could stop her. She reached me just as the applause was dying down, her face flushed, her eyes wild with a narcissist's rage. What is going on, Tessa? Who are those people? I kept my voice calm, steady, the way Eleanor had taught me. My legal parents. I was adopted 2 years ago. You what? She actually staggered back a step. You can't just replace us. I didn't replace you, Lydia. I looked at her evenly, feeling no anger, only a vast, cold pity. You abandoned me first. You told me not to come home. You chose Vanessa's peace over my existence. For 27 years, you made me a ghost. I just decided to finally haunt someone else. Lydia started to sputter. That's not fair. We were just trying to... Fair? I felt Marcus move to my side, a solid, reassuring presence. You want to talk about fair? I spent 27 years trying to earn a place in your family. And you know what I got? An Instagram photo with no empty chair. A Thanksgiving dinner alone in a restaurant. 3 years of silence. I'm still your mother! Lydia's voice cracked, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. Not legally, I said, holding up my left hand, both rings glinting in the light. Not emotionally. Not anymore. You don't get to erase me and then demand a seat at my table. Lydia looked around, suddenly aware of the audience. Her cheeks burned red with the humiliation she had always tried to avoid. This is humiliating, she hissed. Then leave. My voice was soft, final. You showed up uninvited to a Montgomery wedding. You don't get to be the victim here. And then, for the first time in my entire life, my father spoke up. Tessa. Rob's voice was rough, broken. I'm sorry. I turned to look at him. Robert Thorne had aged more than 5 years should account for. His hair was grayer, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes, they were wet with tears. I'm sorry, he said again. I should have done better. I was a coward, Tessa. I knew how she treated you, and I just stood there because it was easier than fighting. The words I'd waited 3 decades to hear, and they came too late. I know you're sorry, Dad, I said, my voice gentle but firm. But sorry doesn't undo the years you stood by and watched. Sorry doesn't give me back the girl who thought she wasn't worth defending. Eleanor appeared at my shoulder, placing her hand on my arm, a quiet reminder of the mother I had now. Lydia stared at Eleanor with barely concealed hostility. "You," she spat. "You're the one who stole my daughter." Richard Montgomery stepped forward then, his voice carrying a steel that silenced the entire barn. "I think it's time for you folks to leave. We didn't steal anything, Mrs. Thorne. You gave her away. We just picked up what you threw out." Lydia flinched like she'd been slapped. "Do you know what she told us the night we met?" Richard continued, stepping closer. "She said she couldn't remember the last time she felt like she mattered. 27 years old, and she was a stranger in her own skin because of you. We didn't steal her. We just showed her what a real family looks like." He signaled to the security guards. "Please escort these people out. Tessa is a Montgomery now, and Montgomerys protect their own." As they were led away, Lydia still whispering about modern lack of loyalty, the wedding guests began to applaud, not for the drama, but for the closure. The rest of the wedding was a blur of joy. We danced until our feet ached, the Napa stars shining bright over the vineyard. 1 year later, life had settled into something beautiful. Marcus and I bought a house in the suburbs of Boston, a little Cape Cod with a big backyard just 20 minutes from Richard and Eleanor. I was no longer freelancing. I was the art director for a major agency, a job where my energy was considered an asset, not a burden. And I was pregnant. Eleanor cried when we told her. Richard tried not to cry and failed. One Sunday afternoon, while we were setting up the nursery, painting the walls a soft sage green, Eleanor asked about names. "Emily," I said. "Emily Grace Montgomery. I want her to have the name of the family that chose her mother." Eleanor pulled me into a hug. "You know, when I saw you sitting alone in that restaurant, I had no idea we'd end up here." "You saved my life that night," I whispered. "No, sweetheart," she said, holding my shoulders. "You saved yourself. We just showed you it was possible." I looked around the nursery, at the crib Richard had built, at the rocking chair from Marcus, and I finally had everything I'd always wanted. I was home. If you're out there and you've been told you're too much or drama just because you asked for respect, know this: it's not you. You deserve to be chosen first, not as a backup, but as a priority. Family isn't just blood and obligation. It's the people who make sure there's always a chair at the table with your name on it. I found my people, and I hope with all my heart that you find yours too. Because you are enough. You always were. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.